Nonetheless, it is a hell of a thing to be bulldozing the East Wing of the White House and putting up a ballroom while you're about to send 42 million people into starvation.
All right, we're not going to waste a single moment. We're going to get right into this episode because we're going to talk about the Deciding to Win report that just came out and what that means. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but Frank, good old Frank, we love Frank Spring from Altum Insight. He's here to talk about it, which I'm particularly excited about because Altum Insight does a lot of work with information and data and polling and deep polling, and the way that they read those reports and decipher that information is really fascinating, and it always resonates with me. So I'm excited to talk to Frank about how he feels about this report in reality to what they're actually seeing on the ground, because I think we're all very hungry for real information and real data and not necessarily opinions. And I gotta say, this Deciding to Win report pisses me off, because it opens with a Nancy Pelosi quote, and it's called Deciding to Win. Did we decide to lose? Is that what I'm missing? Like, was that a decision? So without further ado, Frank, welcome to the show. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, Molly. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, let's get right into it. This Deciding to Win report, who was this put out by?
Welcome PAC is the name of the organization. It's a recently formed political action committee, the essential thesis of which is the Democratic Party needs to attract more moderates. So this is in the long-running fight within the Democratic Party, because everything is 2016 all over again. We are still fighting the internal battle of whether the Democratic Party is too far left or if it's too far to the center. And this is, this would represent the centrist inclination, the moderate inclination, which says the Democratic Party has gone too far to the left and we need to reclaim the center in order to be successful. So that's what Welcome PAC is. And Deciding to Win is a report they just issued on. It's a diagnosis and a prescription. It's what's gone wrong for the Democratic Party and what the Democratic Party therefore needs to fix in the coming years. And surprise, surprise, its conclusion is we have got to become more moderate. We can talk more about that specifically and kind of what their methodology is and the essence of their conclusions. But understand that's where this group came from. That's kind of their whole perspective is Democratic Party is too far left and it's got to tack right in order to reclaim the mantle of political power. If that's that's where they came from.
Which is like ruthless, because it's like, or have they just gone so far right that like a very moderate left person looks radical left now, right? Like, I mean, when you got a president and Stephen Smith saying that if you're a Democrat, you're a radical left member of Hamas.
That was absolutely fantastic.
Terrorist.
Right, and that was a few days before the single largest protest event in certainly in recent American history, what may end up going down as the single largest peaceful protest event in American history. Certainly since 1970, probably since a lot longer than that. And if you looked at who went to that thing, I mean, I'm claiming I'm doing someone else. I'm doing a stolen valor for someone else's Blue Sky post here, but someone but someone who was quite witty, and whoever this is, thank you for saying this, had a picture of the people of the protest in Chicago, and was like, all these people are signed up for Kohl's rewards. And it really is true. Like, these are like, it was just like the most like straight down the middle, like just like, just like very sort of pleasant people, and the feel of those things. And I don't want to, I don't want to spend all the time talking about the No Kings, although I do think it's a sort of incredibly compelling moment for us as a political tendency. But that is an accurate representation of what you are seeing. You've got an administration that is saying people who turn up to this are American hating members of Hamas. You have like the most normal cross section of center left, far left, far left, leftist, a bunch of different, like this whole smorgasbord, this whole, rainbow coalition of, anyone from the center to the far left turning up in gigantic numbers, unprecedented numbers, to use an overused word. And then you have a Democratic think tank shortly thereafter saying we actually have to tack back to them. This is really a policy fight and we've gone too far left on policy. And that if you want to get a sense of why American politics is so disordered, just look at those three phenomena in that order, and it will tell you why we're just talking past each other.
Yeah, I mean, it really does feel like the Democratic Party is so out of touch, and I think it's just, we've all been fed these like talking points, right? Like they're turning kids trans in schools, and like it's fear mongering, and then it kind of the open borders, and it's like, oh, we're too radical, but like none of that is true. Like these things are not based in reality. So it's like, well, yeah, if that was true, then maybe I'd agree with you, except that's not true. And so
none of it's true. Forgive me for interrupting, but not only is none of it true, but it's also not true that that is widely believed or strong or that that's what Americans think of the Democratic Party. And then I think if you really want to get into this report is I think where its conclusion fails, because the conclusion of the report essentially, and again, I want to give credit to Welcome PAC for the sheer staggering amount of work they put into this. This is like a master's thesis. It might be like a PhD thesis. This is a huge amount of public source research that they have pulled together, and they talked to a bunch of different people. It's a ton of labor went into this. So this was not something that someone just casually dashed off. And I want to be at least respectful of that amount of effort there. But the conclusion that it reaches is that the Democratic Party has gone too far left on a number of policy areas, and that it needs to jettison the unpopular policy areas and focus more on popular policy positions. The problem with that conclusion is fundamentally flawed in a ton of different ways. And I'll give you a good example of this. One, the Democratic policy position that we need to abandon, according to this report, is abolishing the police. That is not a Democratic Party policy position. It is no presidential candidate ran on abolishing police. No serious candidate for any office ran on abolishing the police. It doesn't appear on a Democratic Party platform. It is not discussed in Democratic Party circles. Abolish the police or defund the police is an activist position, conceived for very reasonable reasons, very reasonable fears of police violence and state violence, many of which I think a lot of people doubted prior to this year, when we've seen exactly what happens when people are repeatedly subjected to state violence in a more high profile way than a lot of American communities, especially communities of color, have been subjected for years, right? So defund the police is not some act of madness. It is a fairly extreme position that is articulated by a number of activists in response to a very real problem of coordinated and generations-long state violence against some American communities. But it's not a Democratic Party position. And so that's a straw man, and it's full of things like that. And I'll give you, and I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on the detail of it, but that's the one that I think stands out most. But there are other ones in there. Abolishing the death penalty. Abolishing the death penalty has not always been a Democratic Party policy position. It is a position in some states. But here's the thing: if we follow their recommendation and decide, okay, the Democratic Party is suddenly going to become pro-death penalty now, what should we do in states where it's already banned? What should we do in states where there was a plebiscite, a referendum banning it? Are we to overturn the will of the people there? What the hell are you guys talking about? Like, it doesn't follow. It doesn't make any sense. And, for that. And so anyway, that is one of the big and immediate failures of this is that it sets up a straw man of what the Democratic Party believes versus what it should believe. And the problem is what the Democratic Party believes appears to have been derived entirely from from the right-wing fringe. If you went on Twitter and asked what does the Democratic Party believe to what is now an extraordinarily conservative social media site, you would probably get a fair number of right-wing responses that would say, "Oh, Democrats are for, they're for abolishing the police, and they're for letting criminals off, and they're for this, that, and the other thing." None of which is actually true. It's all right-wing fever swamp stuff. So. To make that the basis, the centerpiece of your report is we need to stop doing things that we blatantly aren't, already undermines your credibility as a conclusion. And I think that's probably the biggest problem that we've got there, but there are some other deeper problems here. What we found last year, and to sort of clarify kind of where people are, because this is the real thing. This is where all of these debates come from within these intra-party fights. What do we as a party stand for? And the problem is we don't, in many respects, have a very clear answer for that. Democratic Party puts out a policy platform every presidential election. It sort of has a relationship to what the party talks about. Talks about on a daily basis, or what its leadership talks about, or what it makes it into our legislative or our administrative priorities. Sometimes that relationship is quite profound. Sometimes it is not. The policy platform that we put out in 2016, for example, was the most progressive policy platform the Democratic Party has ever produced. We ran a quite centrist candidate in Hillary Clinton. Right, so you can see the disparity there, right? Like a bunch of the stuff that was in that policy platform probably would not have appeared in her administration at all or in the legislative agenda of the Congress that served under her. So there is a difference between what is put out in formal policy documents by the party and what candidates talk about, what is kind of in the air of the larger democratic ecosystem. And all these fights, are we too far left, are we too far right, ultimately come down to what do we stand for as a party, what should we stand for? What we found last year, and I want to emphasize, I appreciate your kind words at the start of this program. I want to emphasize what Altum does. Altum ultimately is a narrative firm. Our specialty is understanding the behavioral science and cognitive neuroscience of story and how it forms people's identities and drives their behaviors. And we conduct very deep qualitative research to understand that. We use quantitative research like polling and analytics and data from other sources to help inform our conclusions. Ultimately, our edge is, and our method, the sort of core of what we are, is to go very deep with people in a qualitative way. So smaller numbers of people that give you an opportunity to really understand how they're forming their identities, and again, what stories are they telling themselves about their lives, their communities, their country, that builds their political identity and drives their behavior. So that's where we come from. We did a bunch of studies last year, and one of the most consistent findings across population segments, so younger, older, people from all people from all different walks of life, people all different experiences, all different backgrounds. One of the consistent findings we had was people did not know what the Democratic Party stood for except for diversity and inclusivity. And critically, they weren't against diversity and inclusivity, with the exception of a few. Like we did talk to some pretty intact, what we would say an intact Republican identity, which means pretty serious Republican. We talked to some folks with intact conservative political identities. They did not like that. They were opposed to it for all sorts of reasons. Some of it ranging from the idea that it's kind of just sort of a reflexive dislike of anything that's associated to the left to out and out bigotry and racism, right? Like there are all sorts of, even within that position of we don't like diversity and inclusivity, there was not a ton, but there was some nuance for why people didn't like it. But for the most part, a lot of Republicans actually were basically fine with the Democratic Party being for that. Most of the independents were cool with the Democratic Party standing for diversity and inclusivity, that they thought it was important, thought equality was important. Democrats were good with that. Their only reservation was, there was some doubt within the Democratic Party. People with Democratic identities were like, but do we really stand for that? Do we walk the walk as well as talk the talk? But for the most part, people were fine with the Democratic Party standing for diversity and inclusivity. The problem was they didn't know what else we stood for.
Right.
So, and it wasn't that they couldn't speculate. They had, a ton of other ideas, but, about what we might stand for, what we wouldn't, but there was no clear answer there. At that point, Democratic Party is for diversity. They're for, equality of people. And I don't know what else it is. And that's really the issue here is when you look at that problem, it's not that the Democratic Party does too much. This is a classic centrist talking, but sort of radical centrist talking. But the Democratic Party does too much identity politics. We need to stop standing up for diversity and inclusivity or equality. No, we don't. There's just no evidence that that's the truth at all. We do need to fix a now generations long problem in this party, which is we don't know where we are on material politics. And it's not a choice between the two. You have to have both, because you cannot build a coalition by leaving people behind. As a lot of the kind of radical centrist suggestions, their ideas for the future, we need to leave our trans brothers and sisters and others behind. No, we don't. There's absolutely no evidence for that. We don't need to get on board with this weird anti-trans agenda of the Republican Party, because one of the things that we also found was even a lot of Republicans found the strength and viciousness of the anti-trans campaign that the Republican Party led last year. They found that kind of repellent and mean-spirited and strange. That actually was it's a weird, they're way too, the Republican Party, the leadership of the party is way too obsessed with people's genitals. And even a bunch of their own, and even their own people that we talked to, be like, yeah, man, this seems kind of odd to me. The idea that every Republican and a bunch of independents and even some Democrats are sitting around worried about, the Democratic Party and its support of trans people is just a fucking myth. It's a strange belief that's been conjured out of like the middle pages of the Atlantic and some of the worst things the New York Times has ever written. Anyway, I'm getting off track here because that particular contention offends me so greatly. But that is one of a number of things that gets filed under we need to do less identity politics and more material politics. We do need to do more material politics, and we need to sort out what our material politics are. We need to figure out what our relationship to capital is, and we need to figure out what that means for our conception of power in this country and how power flows, because that's where we are weak, and and because there is a fault line, and I think it's deteriorating now. Actually, I think the Democratic Party is increasingly unifying, along with a lot of other Americans, in its relationship to big capital and big money. But for the last 15, 20 years, the Democratic Party has had a substantial branch of the party that has actually been real friendly to big money. And big tech, big finance. If you remember the first Obama administration, especially a big pharma, like our whole thing is, hey, we get along well with big business. We're a friend to big business. Right. And what happens when you've got one part of the party that is interested in big money and capital, close to upper management, close to the ultra wealthy, right? That is interested in building those relationships and working with them and having a cozy relationship with them or a friendly one, and a part of the party that does not and sees them as being the problem, and you can't figure out how to make that work. Those two sides just can't figure it out. What ends up happening? You end up devolving back to the only thing that you can agree on, which is diversity and inclusivity. So it's not that we need to give that one up. It's that we need to sort ourselves the hell out on whether big tech, big finance, big pharma, whether big business is good for this country and should be allowed to continue to operate unfettered and unregulated, or whether it isn't. And I think what's actually happening is most of the Democratic Party, the rank and file, people that would consider voting Democrat, people that are sort of could be in the mix for being Democrats in the future, they've all pretty much made that decision about big money, and they've decided they can go fuck themselves. And the leadership of the party, and a big chunk of the party, not all the leadership, incidentally, there are people who I think understand that thesis. But organizations like Welcome PAC are kind of struggling to see maybe we can get around this problem. Maybe we don't. Maybe we can take a moderate position on this. Maybe we can still stay friends, or still be close, or still be friendly, or still be the responsible, the smart adults in the room. And that as far as business sees us, and the thing is, like, that's not the case. If you take and this is my last point here, and I realize I've been ranting about this for a second, but if you take the position that we want big business to know that we'll stand up for people, but we're reasonable, right? We're not going to take strong. We're not going to we're not left wing ideologues. We're not socialists. We're not any of this other stuff. If your view is that that's how we want to present ourselves to the American people and to big business, what we've seen is big tech, big business, big finance will look at you like the mark you are.
Yep.
And that's been the story of the last 15, 20 years of governance in this country, Democratic and Republican.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I know I'm really stuck on this Pelosi quote, but it's like you're trying to appeal to the people, and then you put a woman who's become a millionaire while in office, like trading stocks at the top of your thing. Like, you've already lost us, right? Like, I think like the Americans are increasingly like very repellent to this idea of the 1%. You got like the Epstein files. You've got like. I think the Disney thing was a big thing. When people realized that they could make Disney lose $4 billion in, 7 days or whatever the number is, I always mix things up. I think people were like, whoa, it's kind of like a toddler, right? When they do something and they're like, whoa, I have that power, I can do that. Yeah. And I think it's like, the protests, the Disney boycott, I think people are realizing more and more, like, we are literally making them rich, and these men literally want to kill us, live forever, and move to Mars, and it's so disconnected from who we are. And then you look at our party, and you got all these people taking APAC money, and then you're like, well, okay, well, it's all the same messaging then, right? It's all the same, like they're it's not the same messaging, but it's kind of the same system. And I think a lot of people feel that way. It's like, well, how are the Democrats different than Republicans that are in office right now, aside from the glaringly obvious things? But like, how are they really different? Yeah. They're all in bed.
This isn't our research. This is research that I was talking to someone about a few weeks ago. What they are seeing from their own research into one specific community within the country, and I don't know that I'm at liberty to share which one they were looking into, but it's a particularly important demographic within the country. what they were seeing is organically people in their research are starting to talk about the wealthy elite as a problem. So people are kind of forming a narrative, and that's been, and the idea of the wealthy elite, the idea of big money. We saw this in our study last year, where people would talk about big money, especially people without strong political identities. Incidentally, they would talk so-called independents. Right. They would talk about big money, capital B, capital M, and it was like they could see them. They weren't just a concept. It was a character. It was a kind of archetype. You could imagine what a big money person was. It's like a yuppie, right? Like, it's a sort of dated expression now, but there was a time when if you say a yuppie, like that was an archetype of a person. You could probably conjure that person and kind of what they wore and how they acted and what their interests were, right? We see these, American, culture, all culture is full of archetypes. And that's the basis of stories. They're a shorthand, a heuristic. You understand this person better. If you say someone is a yuppie or someone's a good old boy, that immediately tells you a lot about them. And it tells you how you are supposed to feel, or at least gives you a clue of how you're supposed to feel about them. And for a long time, the American left has talked about, Democrats and independents and various others have talked about big money and have talked about the wealthy elite. Bernie Sanders has been on this case for a very long time. Powerful special interests, right? He's been on this for a very long time. Thanks. It's better when you can see me flapping my arms. Like we had the full widescreen effect. One of the things that we used to do, I've done that a lot because I used to use that line and that flapping of arms when I would do public presentation training. I'd do sort of speech and media training. Is you got to keep your hands closer, and otherwise you're flapping your arms and shouting powerful special interest, and you're confusing and disorienting your audience. But I love that line, and he's been talking about it for a really long time. But what we are beginning to see now is that people are organically understanding that. Like they have internalized what for a long time was kind of a high register. I mean, rich people have always been around, right? Like, and it's been historically kind of, there are moments of this where, things have obviously changed, but it's actually in this country in particular been kind of hard to get people to villainize the rich. And it's not because there's a sort of notion, you run into Democrats who tell you, oh, it's because every American believes they themselves might be rich. There is a belief in America you can get rich, that you can, you might be that way someday. But mostly there's just not a cultural inclination that being rich is necessarily a bad thing. There are countries where that is true. Right. There's this sort of old joke that, like, if someone, if an American sees the version of this I've heard is with a Scotsman, but you could apply this to any number of countries. If you see an American in a really expensive car, you think, oh, I wonder what he did to get that car and what I have to do to get a car like that. And if a Scotsman sees that, he wonders, I wonder who that guy had to do to get a car like that. So it's sort of, so there are places where there's a little more innate hostility to displays of wealth. You don't really get that as much in America. But what is happening is it looks like organically various audiences, people around the country are beginning to create a class of villain that is the wealthy elite. And I actually do think it was around Epstein. I think that probably is the thing that crystallized it. Like people who have so much wealth that there is no crime that they think they can't get away with, and maybe they're right. And that grates on people. So we are seeing the emergence of this kind of wealthy elite. And I think that is part of a knock-on effect within the Democratic Party, where ultimately the party and the country are kind of deciding, actually big, huge money, huge wealth, probably not great. And maybe the people who have it, not that great either.
Yeah, because, a few years ago, if you showed, like, how much money a rich person, like a Bezos or somebody made, it didn't register. But now when you're like, wait a minute, these 9 guys have more wealth than 250 Americans, like, hold on, combined, like, or these 7 guys, like, it doesn't make sense. And, I've thought about this for a long time, Frank, because when I was in my early 20s, this woman kind of took me under her arm, Adoria Doucette, and Adoria, like, knew everybody who had ever done anything. She was there when Biggie got shot. She knew Tupac. She was there when Snoop was handing out mixtapes. She was in, like, the entertainment business in New Orleans a long time. And so she had, like, just incredible access. Like, I had lunch with Dick Gregory. You know what I mean? Like, I would tell my dad stories, and he'd be like, who are you hanging out with? Right? But long story short, I was exposed to a lot of people with a lot of money, right? And, like, famous people, rappers, actors, whatever, right? And I watched how people behaved around them, and people lost their whole damn minds around rich people. And I think that we've only glorified that with like reality TV, and that like if you have enough, like the goal is to have money so you can shit on people, so you can be mean to people. It's like we've really messed that up because we've idolized these people who typically didn't really have the people skills. They just got a lot of money all of a sudden. Like they're a football player and they have millions of dollars and they're, you know what I mean? Like not everybody is great, but we idolize them and we forgive them for all of these things. And that was sort of the American way. But I think that is really crumbling. I think people are going, wait a minute, are you kidding me? Like the QAnon people were kind of right. Are you kidding me? Like, how did we get here? Right. And then the fact that there's no accountability, where in our own lives as Americans, if you don't pay your bill, they cut it off. And then they want a security deposit, an additional deposit, and you got to go. We have accountability beating down our door every minute of every day. Insurance premiums are going up. You can't get food. We're being held accountable to these laws and rules and the extended warranty that you paid X for. Oh, well, it doesn't cover that thing. I think that's like the age of Karens, right? We're all doing exactly what we're supposed to do. We hate our lives. We suck it up. We do all this stuff we don't want to do. We're spent more money we make, the more it goes out the window, but no one's ever accountable except for us. No one's ever held accountable to the warranty they sold us, or the product they sold us, or the repairs they did, or the whatever. Like I was sitting at the store the other day and I looked over and it said iPhone 16 and I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like I had a 5 like 8 years ago. Like we're at 6. Like come on, man. Where's the accountability? And I think a lot of people are waking up to that, right? I think a lot of people are really gonna not be okay with the ultra wealthy. It's not something to look up to. That's right. Gross.
Yeah, it is gross.
While people starve this month, it's going to get even grosser.
Oh yeah. And it is interesting to me the extent to which this administration is, that Adam Serwer wrote, it's now been 8 or 9 years since he wrote The Cruelty is the Point in The Atlantic. And he was right. Right, that really was the point of the first Trump administration. The point of this one is they're being cruel because that's their nature. Like the cruelty is why they're doing it. Nonetheless, it is a hell of a thing to be bulldozing the East Wing of the White House and putting up a ballroom while you're about to send 42 million people into starvation. Right, that is a remarkable contrast. And this is again another way, and I want to talk about a particular fallacy of Democratic Party and consultant class, professional class thinking, which I've been guilty of in the past, and of which I now repent me. But this is a really good window into that. Is there was a coterie of people within my industry who looked at that and said, "That's not going to register. No one, real people real Americans don't really care about the East Wing of the White House. No one cares about the White House. It's not going to land on anything." It's just a fundamental misunderstanding of the fact that Americans are taught early on to venerate certain symbols. And that works against us a lot of the time, but it works for us some of the time. And the White House is kind of one of them. Sort of taught this is meant to be a special place. And, and we can talk about its history and the fact that it was built by slaves for slave owners and all that other stuff is true. All of that is true. And also two things can be true at once. That can be true. And also it can be a place that a lot of Americans are sort of taught to revere and look up to. And, there's a bunch of stuff about how, the president's there and so it's secure, but it's really our place. There's a bunch of stuff around, there's kind of a bunch of stuff around that. People have complex relationships with symbols is my point, right? Humans are great at this. Some of the earliest, indicators of kind of power and community are people who built, temples and monuments and like this big thing is ours and it symbolizes us. So the idea, so the idea that demolishing that, especially as you're about to further impoverishes. So a group of Americans, the SNAP recipients who are already by definition fairly impoverished is absolutely wild. And the idea that wouldn't register with people, I think, bespeaks a fallacy that exists within an extreme example of a fallacy that exists within sort of Democratic Party professional class, which I refer to as the vending machine theory of voters, which is the idea that people make decisions, they decide what issues they care about, And if you can talk about those issues, and if you're right on those issues and you can talk about those issues in the right way, then people will decide that is the kind of politician that I like, and therefore I'll vote for you. The reason I say it's the vending machine theory is if I can just figure out what letter and number of issue to put into this person, then I'll just go up to this voter and I'll press A7 and the vote will come back out. Right? It's as simple as that. I'm just going to tell you, you believe in this issue, I believe in the same issue, you will vote for me. That is not how voters construct their identities. It's not how they identify with candidates. It's not how they make decisions. It's just human behavior is multiply determined. The whole reason we founded Altum is that kind of hypercognitive, which is to say, really, high register, higher thinking, like it's all about policy issues. People care about the issues. They want to know where you are. Like if you're wrong on the minimum wage, like Democratic Party needs to be for a $15 minimum wage, but against Medicare for all because people want one policy and not the other. No, man. What they're, to the extent that people care about any policy, it is a heuristic for what kind of Democrat you are. What is your belief in what government's role is? That's what they're sort of looking for here. And I'll give you a really specific example of that. I will redact the candidate's name to preserve their privacy. But I was working for a candidate a number of years ago, and we were having a really hard time. Donors were trying to figure, this is a Democratic primary, and the donors that we needed to give money and the supporters, everyone else, but the problem began with donors. We're trying to figure out what kind of Democrat is this? It was a fairly crowded primary. This person was having trouble breaking through. So they wanted to issue a policy of some kind to kind of put their stamp on the election, sort of give people something to work on. And this was going to be about universal child care. And it came down to universal child care for every child in the relevant state, or universal child care for everyone except means testing up to 93% of the poverty line or 20% of the poverty line, whatever, except for means testing. That seems like a really fine distinction. But when you say one or the other, a Democrat who says, I'm for universal child care, period, that tells you something about what kind of Democrat they are. I am going to do, it is a simple thing. Every child deserves, everyone in this state deserves free child care, right? You should know that your child is getting good quality, safe child care during the day, so you can go, that is a social responsibility that we all share. Or are you a kind of means tester? Some people deserve it, some people don't. It's a very sort of Clintonian approach to it. We don't want to give service to people who can already afford it, so we're going to make everyone fill out 10 pages of paperwork before we decide whether or not you get childcare. Right? That's those are two, it seems small, but those are two really different kinds of Democrats. And that's an area where policy really does matter. If you're one or the other, not because people have strong feelings about what the means testing line should be for universal child care, but because they want to know, are you a Democrat that's going to make me fill out a bunch of paperwork before you decide before we get free child care? Or are you a Democrat who's just going to say free child care, that's the end of it? And we're going to make that happen. That's the way that policy does affect political identity, political behavior. But for the most part, people are not sitting back at home thinking, oh, well, this person's for a $15 minimum wage, but they're also for Medicare for all, and I like the one, but I don't like the other, so I can't vote for them. That is just not how people make decisions. It's not how they form political identities. And it is to assume that it is you spent way too much time with polls looking at how different crosstabs feel about different issues versus how they feel about candidates. And you've come to see voter behavior as an endless matrix of overlap between issues and candidates. And that's just not it. It's so much more inchoate than that. It's so much more about habit and passion and, instinct and, whether they find someone credible, whether they trust them or not. It is so much it is just a much more complex process than this. And the fact that you still find that calculus that the Democratic Party needs to move left or move right on its policy issues tells you just how deep that fallacy has gone. And it goes a long way to explaining why, as a party, we have been basically nowhere for 10 years.
So where do you think we're headed? Who do you see in, making noise right now, making moves that you think resonates more with that? I'm very curious to know what you think about Graham Platner and all of that.
Platner is an interesting character because you can see why people were so intrigued by him. I was intrigued by him. I don't doubt that a lot of I love that he began his campaign willing to name a villain. and his villain is billionaires, right? His villain is the wealthy elite. That's been a problem for the Democratic Party. It's a problem, and I've done work with progressive parties internationally as well. It is a problem for the political left writ large all over the world, as we have a really hard time naming our villains. Mm-hmm. The right does not. The right has no such problem. Right's always been able to name their villains.
People.
But we have a hard time naming our villains for a variety of reasons that we can get into. And I really liked when his campaign launched that he was willing to name his villains right out of the gate. The problem is billionaires. They're doing us down. And it was essentially just what you said earlier in this, in this very show, where, you were saying we live our lives under the constant stress of precarity and, having our time and our energy, sapped by the need to take all of these extra steps just to make sure we're not taken advantage of, to whose benefit, right? To the, the benefit of people who have more money than, 100 families could use in 10 lifetimes, right? So I liked where he was going with there. I could understand a lot of that. The issue that I have with Platner, my guess is, if I'm going to prognosticate here, the primary is probably far enough away that I don't think the recent, calling it a kerfuffle trivializes it, but the recent concern about the fact that the man had until very recently a Nazi tattoo, I don't know that that's actually going to affect I don't think it's going to affect things very much. It's up for the people of Maine to decide. I will say this: it is interesting to me that there is such a hunger for that archetype. That we've been sort of conditioned to think, okay, we need a working class guy, an oysterman, right? Like, a guy, is, served in the Marines, right? Like a guy who's, a working class guy. There's such a hunger for that we are willing to fight over and people of good conscience and people's opinion I've respected are willing to fight for the idea that people should just suck it up and ignore the fact that the guy had a Nazi tattoo for almost 20 years before he got rid of it. Yeah. No one is entitled to a U.S. Senate seat, right? And yeah, I completely buy the argument. Honestly, I do. I completely buy the argument. He had no idea what it was when he got it. It's very possible he didn't know what it was for a really long time. But what he had was the Totenkopf. And the Nazi Totenkopf is one of the most famous Nazi symbols that any of them wore, right? Like, it is not, and there does seem to be some evidence that he might have known what it was years ago and just kind of kept it, not because he's a Nazi, but because he didn't feel the need to get rid of it. One way or the other, you need to be curious enough to know about what's on your body, and you need to understand what it could mean to people that it is on your body. And the fact that he has moved, the narrative that he and his campaign have moved into is, I can't believe people are trying to cancel me just because I got a stupid tattoo when I was younger and because I posted dumb stuff on the internet. First, everyone was prepared to overlook the dumb stuff on the internet. Honestly, that was a less than 3 days wonder of a story. And I really don't think there was any there. People were spouting off and saying wild stuff on the internet in the aughts and teens. Like, it.
Myself included.
Right, what I said on Reddit, I wasn't on Reddit in 2013, thank God, but the argument that what I said on Reddit in 2013 is not who I am right now, I have no trouble believing that at all. That seems extremely credible to me. Mm-hmm. But this is really specific. If someone finds the idea of voting for a guy who had a Nazi tattoo for almost 20 years, for any reason, if someone finds that repellent, that's a perfectly defensible position. I wish to God that he had taken the position that, I get how hard this is for people to trust me right now. All I'm asking for is your understanding and as your understanding and your forgiveness that I genuinely had no goddamn clue what this thing was. I should have known. I am really sorry. I will understand if that causes you to lose trust in me and and I need to win your trust back, right? If that's your attitude, okay, man, I still don't love it, but that's a place to go. But if your attitude is well, it was never really a thing and I can't believe people are getting mad about it. Dude, this country is beset with Nazis right now. Yeah, do you not get why we'd be so upset, why people would be so upset by this? You're not entitled to a Senate seat just because you ran for it and are willing to call billionaires assholes. We can find populists who don't have Nazi tattoos aren't defiant over the idea that it matters. Right, that's the part that I'm really forgive me. I got so bogged down in what the Platner thing means that I actually forgot that there was a larger question that precipitated that. So, but that's kind of where we are with this. Is this fixation? within certain members of the party that like, okay, well, we found a populist leftist for you to like, and now you guys want to cancel him just because he had a Nazi tattoo for 17 years. Sure, that's a perfectly fine decision to make.
Legit ass reason, yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. And if you find him credible and you find his apology, his apology real, and if you believe the guy genuinely isn't a Nazi and you're prepared to overlook it, if you're a voter in Maine and that's your view, okay, that's fine. Like I can't tell you not to, but set your expectations for reasonable for a guy who makes a mistake of that magnitude and then acts put out so that people call him on it.
Yeah, his initial, he posted a video, right before it came out, and he seemed, annoyed. And it was like, dude, this is not a good look. Your team shouldn't have put this out. This is not a good look. But I've been following his accounts now for, I guess, a month or something, so I see a lot of his videos. And I will say he is definitely, owning up to it a lot more. His messaging has shifted in the last week and a half. And
good.
I was annoyed that he got it covered up with an Irish tattoo. I'm like, come on, man, leave my people out of this. You know what I mean?
It was a Norse tattoo, surely. Is it not Fenrir the wolf swallowing the world?
I'm just talking a little shit. But I didn't like his message, but I will say, I saw a clip of a trans woman got up and was like, listen, I want to, fight, but I'm afraid to go out there. But, I'll fight for you if you fight for me. And it was, an incredibly poignant moment. And he was like, I believe that everybody should have the right to be who they want and live in their own body, however they feel. He did a really good job of answering the fucking question. You know what I mean? I think, not just, I believe all people are Americans. No, I believe you should have the right to live in your body however you feel and you should, and I respect that he did that, but it's a conflicting thing, right? Because it's super easy to say absolutely not, but then there's the other side where you're like, well then fuck, who's gonna beat this monster Susan we gotta, and so I feel like there's a little panic that influences people, and then I think also it's and I'm just speaking from when I'm driving and thinking about this stuff. America's a racist ass country, okay? And everybody we know who is over 50 is a little racist or a little biased, right? And it's a racist country. So I don't think that means that you should I have no real opinion on Platner. I haven't formed it yet, right? But these are the things I'm thinking about. It's that is normalized. And a bunch of other dudes in the military got that same tattoo. And then he also got military clearances. So that means that we're in a country that it's normalized and we're really seeing that. And so as a Democrats want to cancel everybody all the time, and you don't believe exactly how I feel. And one time I went a little viral, and somebody went back 2 years in my post to say, look, this is contradicting. I knew I would find something. I was like, you literally just spent 2 hours looking for a reason to prove that I'm full of shit, right? We have this attacking of, well, you're not a Democrat because you don't feel the same way I do about Gaza or Palestine, or you don't even talk about it like they've known everything you've said. But isn't the goal for people to say, yeah, that was wrong and I messed up and I'm not the same person? And he even said he went to therapy and that really helped him change his worldview. And it's that's what we all want from these men in our country, because they're not doing that. So it's fuck, why do you got to have a Nazi tattoo though, man? You know what I mean?
I mean, there's a lot to like. There was a lot to like about the guy. There may still be a lot to like about the guy. And I think, if his view is evolving, that's encouraging to hear. I hope it does. I will say, actually, I do want to pick up on one thing you said. Certainly the power structures in America are rooted in racism. They enforce racism. They create racism. There's that should be a matter of settled understanding, right? It just is. It is what it is. It doesn't always have to be that way. It shouldn't always be that way, and we can make it another way. But that's where it is right now. There is data to suggest that actually Americans tend to wildly overestimate how racist and sexist other Americans are. That we tend to look at, particularly people on the left of center, tend to look at the country and say, well, the country is just so racist that we can't do this, or we couldn't do this, we couldn't vote for this person, we couldn't support this person. And there, again, the racism is there, the misogyny is there. Those things are real. We do tend to overlook the extent to which people, again, particularly with political identities, voting behavior is very difficult. Is difficult to assign to one variable There are definitely people in Trump's coalition who do have really two variables, and they are race and gender. Right? That's it. Like, that's it. That's where this whole thing begins and ends for them. So, there is for sure a cohort of Americans for whom racism and misogyny is the defining feature of their political identity. There's no question about that. There is a much larger population of people for whom that may or may not be an issue, that may or may not come into play in some way. It can be overcome by other issues. It can change over time. There is no evidence that people become more socially conservative over time. And indeed, there's some evidence that people become more socially liberal over time. What happens is people typically do become more economically conservative over time. Mm-hmm. And the sort of speculation there is that is a sort of natural retrenchment with its understanding of risk, right? As you get older, you become a little less risk tolerant because you have less time to recover if things go sideways.
You can see the end.
It's just not right. Yeah, it's just not. I mean, and the thing is, like, that's not. That can lead to some unfortunate conclusions if the entire leadership of a party is over the age of 75, or the entire leadership of a country is over the age of 75. I mean, think about it. When Donald Trump ends this term, assuming he makes it all the way through, which is a matter between him and his doctor, right. But like, if he makes it all the way through, we will have gone 12 years of presidents over the age of how old was Trump when he was first elected? 72. Of presidents in their 70s and 80s undergoing visible cognitive decline in front of the whole country. That is a long time for that to happen. So I bring this up because, like, when all of the leadership are extremely old, by the standards of human leadership going back through history, there have been old leaders, but it's very rare to have a leadership cadre that is this old and this intact in its age. When you've got a leadership cadre that's that old, you're naturally going to get a small c conservatism around sort of matters of economics and policy. But there is no evidence that people get more socially conservative as they get older. In fact, a lot of people get more progressive. So I think we can assume that there will be a portion of Americans who will make some pretty ugly political decisions on the basis of race and gender. I think we as a political tendency need to be careful if we say, well, blithely say, well, America is a racist country. In our political behavior, we can be, but also a lot of the time we're not. We periodically sort of have these galvanic moments when we're like, actually, no, that's not who we want to be.
Right.
And I think we may be setting up for one right now.
I think so too, because the reality is like maybe some of the older people, but I mean, if you exist in this world, you got like a trans member in your family, or a member with ADHD, yep. Or a member who's disabled, or you know what I mean, like, or a member who married a black guy, you know what I mean, like you can have so much hatred until it's your own grandchildren, and then all of a sudden, right. Like, you turn on Fox News and you're like, but I love my granddaughter. And it's like, yeah, dude, you know what I mean? Wake up. That's,
and people are funny. You can have people in your life who are trans or who, belong to different ethnic groups or whatever. And you can still have, what we've found is that people still also maintain surprisingly strange views. But to your point, it is possible for, racism or transphobia or misogyny certainly misogyny to coexist with having people, in your family who belong to any of those afflicted groups. But you're right. Over time, it does have a tendency to, life experience does tend to whittle away some of that rigidity. And I think a really good example of this, just incidentally, is for the most part, and there are a couple of big exceptions, but for the most part, referenda around the country to ban prison labor have been extremely successful, and successful in places that they have no business being successful, in very conservative states like Tennessee. And a big part of it is the American carceral state. The way that we practice criminal justice in this country is so aggressive in its tendency to arrest and prosecute that tons of people know someone who's been behind bars. And it really does come down to that. Like, so many people have been caught up in this system that you sort of like, you look at this and you think, well, I don't want, a cousin or a friend or a friend's friend or whatever. Like, you begin to understand that, like, the criminal element is not, like, it's not a different class of people. It's someone you know.
And the system is so rigged. I have a lot of experience with somebody who spent 10 years in Virginia state penitentiaries from 21 to 31, and was moved around constantly, and then got in trouble and went back into jail for a couple months and then got out. And so I got the crash course in privatized prisons, and that's kind of what radicalized me like 15 years ago. And so whenever me and Dad start getting into it, I'm like, follow the money, Dad. It's privatized prisons. I mean, even the whole border conversation, right? You know what I mean? Like,
Oh, yeah.
Where do a lot of those, people go? Into privatized prisons. And when there's checks being cut for everybody that's in a prison, when we're like incentivizing people to go to prison, then the system is broken. And when, it all kind of goes back to the same place. But it was so dehumanizing. And like, even now, if you know somebody in jail, it costs like $4 a minute to call them. Like, it's like, it's like 1980 in prisons. Like, they will move people, so now they're 7 hours away in the state. Family members can't go see them. I mean, the whole thing is beyond evil. It's beyond evil, and I think, all these things are coming home to roost. Like, people have family members, or they know somebody, and it's personal now. It's not just a talking point. This is people they care about. I think even the immigration right now, all these people are like, but I love my gardener. Yeah, man. Like,
what? And one of the things that you see this, one of the things that we found last year was we saw fears about crime. Not surprisingly, right? Like, we saw people concerned about crime. We did not see a strong constituency for old school hang 'em and flog 'em politics.
Right.
They were worried about crime, but the answer was not, we got to crack down. And you can see another way that this administration is wildly out of step with the country. The idea that that there's this constituency of people, and I think Trump genuinely thinks that like Chicago and Detroit and Washington and Baltimore and other urban areas, especially ones that are led by black mayors or mayors of color. This he cannot abide, of course, for all the reasons that you would expect. He genuinely thinks it's like RoboCop, right? Like, it's just like this dark, incredibly dangerous and violent place. When in fact, that is not what these cities are at all. And the thing is, that is like that response that we've just got to send in. He loves to talk about this. I can send in whoever I want. I can send in the Guard. I can send in other, like, we're going to send in the Marines. Like, this whole notion that we're just going to send in the troops. And I think, someone else said that in this administration's mind, it's like the troops are the cop's dad. And like, if you can't, just wait till your father gets home, he's going to stab you with a bayonet. Like, we're going to send in the troops, and they're just going to mow down the loot. It doesn't work like it just does not work like that, because that crime wave that they believe that exists does not exist. So there's nothing for the Guard to do. There's nothing except to clean up trash, as they're doing in D.C. People who are being mulch. People who are being people who are on active duty, leaving their families and their jobs in order to go and clean up trash in D.C. because this is what the president wants. But we did not but the idea that there is some sort of really popular constituency for send in the troops, send in the cops, and really crack these people on the skull, it just doesn't exist anymore. And it's one of those ways that kind of the old fault lines are breaking. Again, there's a real minority for it, but there is not anything close to a majority for it, or even a plurality for it. People want something done they're concerned about crime, not generally, especially nationally.
Right.
Most people believe that crime is not that much worse in their own community. There are a few places where people do believe crime is worse in their communities. And that actually does appear to be, to a degree, rooted in reality. Beliefs about crime nationally are not rooted in reality. You can see that as a media phenomenon.
Yeah.
But beliefs about crime locally, those tend to have a little more relationship with what we see in data. But people want something done about that, but they're actually not that interested in escalating mandatory minimums or returning the death penalty to places that don't have it, in spite of what some Democratic groups might tell you, or any of these other kind of hang 'em and flog 'em ideas. This is all just 90s retread bullshit. If you fundamentally if you suffer from that vending machine theory, people are worried about crime. So I go to this vending machine of a voter and I press B9, on this vending machine, which is the worried about crime, want hang 'em and flog 'em politics, and the vote is going to come back out. And it's just not how it works anymore.
Yeah, I think being a DC resident, I really saw that firsthand. It's like, and I lived in a neighborhood called Trinidad in Northeast DC. And then anybody who knows DC is like, what? You lived in Trinidad? It was definitely like a bad neighborhood. And I moved in the early 2000s to one of the most notorious open air drug market blocks from back in the 80s. That was like way calmer now, but Rayful Evans had 3 stash houses on that block. I mean, it was,
Yeah, that's where Rayful Edmonds famously shot a preacher in broad daylight, if memory serves. Like things were happening in that neighborhood back in the crack epidemic.
I lived on that block on Orleans Place, right? But it was after everything had calmed down. You know what I mean? But cab drivers, I would get in a taxi in DuPont Circle and say Orleans Place, and they would turn around and put their glasses down and look at me and go, "You sure, white lady?" You know what I mean? Like, what are you doing going to Orleans Place? But so I'm not going to sit here and say that it was also fascinating because Gallaudet University was across the street, and so we could do a whole episode on that block alone. Honestly, it was fascinating. But I'm not going to sit here and say that that DC crime is perfect. No, there's a lot of problems, but if you live in DC, you understand where those problems come from. They come from food deserts. It's very intentional, you know what I mean? Like where I live, there was 7 grocery stores within a mile and a half, and then yet in Ward 8, there's 1 grocery store for 87,000 people. Right, and you wouldn't want to shop there on the best day. And so, of course there's more crime there. And so if you live there, you understand the dynamics of everything, right? You understand that DC is not perfect, but it does not require the National Guard. It requires generational change. It requires opportunity. It requires education and nutrition, It doesn't require military force, And even when the military did invade DC, they didn't go to Ward 8. They didn't go anywhere near where all the crime is. Yeah. They went to Constitution Avenue. They went to Independence Avenue. They went to the high optic places, And so it's we're not going to say DC is the safest place in the world, but I also lived there for 20 years. I ran a company where I would ride my bike home at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I mean, never had any problems. I lived there. I was alone a lot, moving through the streets a lot. I mean, really had no issues. So that's the experience for a lot of people. A lot of the crime in DC is totally caused by gentrification. You can't put $1 million condos in the middle of a neighborhood that's riddled with issues and then wonder why people are getting hurt, right? You can't do that. You can't displace people like that. So, and I think most people know that, right? Even I have friends that lived in Chicago who left Chicago because of all the crime there, but I still don't think they would advocate for having the military go in. That's not a solution.
And also, Chicago and Baltimore and Boston and a number of other cities are posting right now historically low, particularly historically low violent crime. Right. It's one of those things to the point that it kind of defies analysis. What happened here? And again, some of it is you're comparing to 2020 and 2021, which is one of the most violent years in recent American history. So anything's going to look like a come down from that. But urban murder rates are collapsing all over the country. And some of it, I think, is, credit to, maybe some of the leadership in some of the cities, and they could talk about some of the things that they've done. But for the most part, it's just people stopped killing each other. And that sounds reductive. And I know somewhere out there, there's a crime epidemiologist whose head is exploding because I'm being so reductive here. But, but to a certain degree in politics, things just, in policy and government and life, things just happen. And, there are a bunch of structural factors, particularly crime is one of those things that's so hard to disentangle, to assign to one cause. Again, COVID was the pandemic and lockdowns it was a little bit different because you could look at the effect of this kind of unraveling of social rhythms and social relationships. And you could say, okay, that's probably why, 2021 was such a catastrophically violent year and why it took so long for things to come down. But why 2025 has been in many countries and, in many cities, an extraordinarily peaceful year by any measure. Not entirely clear why that's happened and why that's happened so fast. So that needs some study. What it does, but what that also tells you, and there's theft and there's it's not true everywhere. Before the National Guard DC still had was following this in every area except carjacking. Carjacking was this one area that was just stubbornly high, and that to a certain degree, placing a ton of uniforms around the city has cut down on that, but to a certain degree, it hasn't. So there are a few outliers like that, but for the most part, the belief in America as a place that was just absolutely riddled with near constant out of control violent crime is just a myth. And even the people that we talked to who were worried about crime, it was much more property crime, right? People getting their catalytic converters stolen. Which people don't like, right? That ruins someone's day, costs someone a lot of money they might not have. That's a serious issue. You got to look into that. And we see this, and this is a different subject for a different podcast, but we see this across the pond where, in Britain, the Starmer government is really struggling to figure out what is the proper relationship of police to what we would consider sort of petty property crime, like people getting their bicycles stolen from the train station versus, other things. And their response has been, not unreasonably, from their perspective, to say, well, actually, we're not going to look after people. We're not going to look into people stealing bikes from train stations anymore because it's just not the damage isn't enough to make it worth police time. But that's the kind of crime people are worried about and thinking about, right? Like, because that ruins someone's day. That was their bike. They're going to have to walk back in the rain because it's Britain. Like, it's raining all the time. Like, they're going to have to walk back, and also it was theirs, right? And it's such an offense to the notion of like social order. You come out and your catalytic converter has been stolen and you're like, God damn, man. Like, like it is an example. It is an encroachment of a chaotic order by someone who, for whatever reason, decided that they didn't want to be part of the social, of the social contract, to the extent that they decided they were going to steal from someone else. And, and that feels like a real affront. Like, you want the police to be involved in that. As opposed to, a number of the other things that various police forces have spent their time doing. So it's a much more but all of which is to say, it's a much more complicated issue, none of which suggests that the right position for any political party is to return to a kind of, early 90s style hang 'em and flog 'em politics, where we're worried about super predators and, right. 3 strikes. And we're sending 16-year-olds to prison for the rest of their lives because they were caught up in a gang, right? Like, that's not the direction that we need to be going here. And to be clear, while Deciding to Win and Welcome PAC aren't specifically advocating for that, their position on things like we should stop advocating against the death penalty, or we should stop advocating for the abolition of the death penalty, just elides the complexity of this issue and the extent to which the Democratic Party has been not just on the right side of history, but the right side of politics on that issue consistently. People just have people's political identities, like their behavior, are multiply determined. It's a much more complex process. And until we get to go back to my talking point here, until we get our material politics right and figure out our relationship with capital, and this isn't going to be made in some single room by 10 people in DC, right? Like, this is going to be how we incentivize people to. This is one of the things I will say for Platner. It was encouraging to see a national infrastructure, or the consultant class to which I belong, encouraging people to support, incentivizing a candidate to behave in this overtly populist way, right? On the sort of left of center populist way. The way that we kind of decide where we are as a party is not, again, in small rooms. It's in, who do we decide is okay to run as one of our candidates that we all should support, that we all give money to, that we all talk about, that we all kind of look up to as a leader, right? Like, that's a much more organic process. And that's what we're going through right now. We have to figure out what our relationship is to capital with that, in that respect.
Okay. So in looking forward, Frank, what is the biggest takeaway, I think, from not just the report, but who do you think is getting any of this right now? Like, who do you think is, how do we fix this? Who do we get behind? What do we do next?
What do we do next? That's fantastic, and I'm glad you asked on this podcast. What do we do next is actually really straightforward. We are still not going to be saved by someone else. We, as a political tendency, are coming to a clear understanding that the most powerful thing that we can do is to go to the next No Kings, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's like, prepare for, because this situation, no king. Like, if we're beginning to see some backbone out of Democratic leadership, and we are, to be fair, they're holding the line on the shutdown much more consistently and powerfully than I expected them to.
I agree.
And it is an ugly thing that has to happen. That is happening now because, again, of the sort of catastrophe. So actually, the first thing that you could do, what do we do next? Give to your local food bank. I did yesterday. Give so much it fucking hurts. There was a thing I was really looking forward to doing in December of this year, a little treat for myself, which I am postponing because I had to get, and I don't expect a damn cookie for this, but this is what I'm talking about. A thing that you were looking forward to doing, give to a food bank so much that you can't do that. If you want to wait until next week to see if they actually decide to walk back from the cliff, I wouldn't blame you for that. Give to the food bank anyway. They're still hungry people.
They still need it. Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that we're still talking about here, right? There isn't a single candidate who's going to get us out of this. What we need to do is we need to take care of each other and to consistently demonstrate through things like No Kings that we as a people are not fucking around. Yes. We expect the Democratic leadership, I do not believe, would be holding the line as hard as they are on this thing if 2% of the American population, which is a ton to get to. Can you imagine getting 2% of people to leave their homes to do one thing, the same thing at the same time? It's insane.
I did events for years. I can't get 20 people to do anything.
Right, exactly. To get that number of people, if we hadn't sent a very clear message that we're not having this shit, we really are not. So go to the next No Kings, and think about this. Like, what is going to happen is we're going to have to turn up, and we're going to have to take care of each other. And ultimately, and I know I keep saying this, but I want to understand this administration and the various corporate interests that I am turning into Bernie Sanders here, but this administration and the corporate interests that support them and have thrown in their lot with them, right? See a lot of corporate interests that actually they would prefer to exist as monopolies under American fascism, and they would prefer to exist as non-monopoly companies under American democracy. But they're not going to get the message until we send it really strongly and forcefully. That could include a defensive democracy like a general strike. And in order to be prepared for something like the mayor of Chicago is already talking about this.
Yeah.
Those two words together are coming out a lot now. General strike. It's unprecedented in American history. Yeah. It may not come to that, but the readier we are for that, the more we show them we can take care of each other, and we will turn up in numbers that you can't do anything about. The harder it gets for this administration to hang on, and the clearer it is to people like the leadership of the Democratic Party that this is the direction of travel in history. You either get with us or you get the hell gone. So we're not looking for someone else. We are looking within ourselves. Take care of each other and turn up when you need to.
And I think we do that. I think we're doing that all the time. I think we're seeing more videos like the lady in the polka dot dress and people standing up and like people just having enough and pushing back and chasing these ICE agents out and taking care of each other. And even like the protest, it was just a bunch of like Kohl's members.
People getting their Kohl's. Listen, people love American democracy and they love good value on athleisure. Those two things can work together. You might have to do without one for a while, but
you know what I mean? Who doesn't love a good yoga
pant? Better to give up the athleisure.
I love that, and give so much to your food bank that it hurts. I honestly love that, Frank. I love that a lot, and I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that today because I think it really does matter, and I think that maybe we can get back to like that, humanness inside of all of us, because I don't think, as much as it seems like people are cheering on this cruelty, I don't think that's how the average person feels.
The data on this is extraordinarily clear. People do not sign up for this. They don't want it. They don't like it.
Right, Arms of an Angel by Sarah McLachlan wouldn't be the saddest song on the planet if we didn't all have a heart somewhere deep down inside of us. You know what I mean? Like, it's embedded in us to want to take care of each other, even though that's not what it seems like. So, I do want to plan another episode with you to talk about the general strike, because I kind of was almost going to talk to you about that today, but I feel like that's a whole episode, because that was my immediate instinct 6 months ago, but I am not smart enough to understand what the implications of that are, and I don't think people are talking about that intelligently enough, and so I would love to do a whole episode with you about the general strike and what does that mean and how would that impact, just really get into it, because I think that we need to talk about that more, and we don't want to make the most vulnerable people even more vulnerable, but at the same time, we could shut it.
It might come to it. It might come to it.
Well, and I think it'll be a very empowering moment for Americans to realize, the Disney thing, we have the power, y'all. It's our government. It's our taxes. This is not this separated thing. It's our money, But how do we do that without making sure that the people who are already struggling struggle more, right? I don't, if I don't work and I say, sorry, clients, I'm not going to book you on podcasts this week, I'm not sure that's going to have as much impact as somebody who works for Amtrak. But somebody who works for Amtrak is not in a position to say, sorry, I'm not going to work this week, as much as you might say, well, that's really annoying, Molly, but I'm with you on this thing because my company's not going to fold if you don't do your job for me this week, versus the guy on minimum wage working at Amtrak. It's a different story. So I would love to really get into all of that, because I am definitely not smart enough to know what the right thing is, but that feels like, as an Irish woman,
right.
That feels
strikes
like
and boycotts are where you came in.
But that's
it. And what you're saying, we can talk about that in greater detail, of course. But to a certain degree, one of the things that led to this moment is that the muscles of organizing, of labor organizing in this country have atrophied over the last 50 years. I mean, and we're going to have to get into training and rebuild them fast. And I am not a labor historian. I'm not a labor organizer. I'm not a labor expert. I am a member of maybe the most useless union in the United States, the National Writers Union. If we go on strike, no one will notice, no one will care. But the point here is, as you say, like you and I have jobs where, like, if we go on strike, no one, a small number of people are going to notice, and even fewer people will care.
Be annoyed with
we
me,
have
yeah.
but the thing is that is honestly, like, but if one person calls out of a grocery store, that's par for the course. If 30 people call out of a grocery store,
You can't open your doors.
right, then you've got problems. And that's so, we can kind of have a little fun with ourselves and our industry, but like these things are all connected. There are things that we can do to be part of something like this. Again, it's not my area of expertise. I'm happy to talk about what that would mean in kind of, sort of narrative and political terms. But again, I don't know that that's where we're going, but that's where we're going to end up. But that is the direction of travel.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what it takes to get these people to listen.
Yeah, because, they're out here on their yachts with our dollars. And I think they realize that, but I don't know if Americans totally realize how much we're funding it. And I think that even the billionaires have gotten just raise it, they'll keep paying. Well, they're not going to keep paying. And Disney learned that lesson real quick. I mean, they caved in, a few days. So, I think it would be really eye-opening for the bad guys, and I think it would be very empowering for the good guys, and I believe the American people are the good guys in this scenario, not Democrats, not, one or the other, but us.
That's right. Yeah, and I would be surprised if it got there, but it might, and we need to be ready if it does.
Yeah, well, fascinating times, Frank. Thank you for your time. This has been a long one, but, I feel like you and I could talk all day about this stuff. I appreciate your time. Thank you for hanging out with us. I have all your information in the notes. If people want to get more information about Altum Insights and what they're doing over there, you can check out Frank. All his stuff is at the bottom. Usually I end and say, please share this content, but I'm actually going to put a call out. I need help with my Substack. It is growing. I have lots of followers, some subscribers. The podcast is doing really well there, but I know I'm not doing enough. So if you are listening to this podcast and you like it and you want to help a girl out, I would definitely appreciate it. So until then, Frank, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for hanging out with me. Always a great time. And until next time, thank you very much.